All right, so thank you everybody. We're about to get to the opening remarks by Dr. Janet King. Before we do that, I want to guide you back to Poll Everywhere. What we're going to do here today for the questions after, like we will have a little bit of time to ask you a couple of questions after you speak. So what we're going to do is on Poll Everywhere, we're going to be collecting the questions that you might want to ask her. So the question should be up right now. Brendan, next question. It will be up in a second. And while that is coming up, I'd like to invite Janet. Would you mind coming up so that so we can get to you? So Janet King is the Associate Deputy Minister of Public Service and Procurement, and she's actually got very deep roots in the innovation space. But she also actually has some like a bunch of broad experience also involving, I think you've been to Canada's North and worked there for a while, is that right? Right? So yes, I thought so. So you actually span a lot of these perspectives, and I really appreciate you coming and giving us some opening remarks here.
Thanks very much. And thanks, merci Sylvain, and thank you, Monica, for the introduction and the opportunity to speak to this group today. It really is a full house, so clearly a topic of deep interest. I'd also say merci, Elder Rochelle Prudhomme, for your very wise opening remarks and for setting the tone for today. It's very helpful. I might choose a few words on the way through my remarks as well, stealing from yours. And as it's been mentioned, but I would also like to again acknowledge that we are gathered here on traditional unceded Algonquin territory. I was really pleased to be invited here today to help start this workshop and hoping to be able to share some insight on what the federal government is doing to support inclusivity, a little about my own lived perspective, and finally about how the government is acting to promote inclusive innovation in a new initiative that's intended to strengthen federal science collaboration. My remarks are going to be mostly in English, mais je peux aussi prendre les questions de la langue officielle de votre choix. So like most organizations, the Government of Canada recognizes that diversity and inclusion spurs innovation, increases productivity, and creates a healthy and respectful workplace. The government, of course, wants to ensure that its employees are representative of the people it serves. This is, of course, the democratic way, but it also echoes the inclusive innovation approach that you're discussing today, that a diversity of people is better prepared to identify workable solutions and avoid detrimental consequences. As such, the government is committed to a work environment that's inclusive, obstacle-free, and non-discriminatory, and is working in key areas to enable a vision of inclusivity where all people, inside government and outside, feel they're welcomed, valued, and important. To do so, the government is continuously adapting its hiring practices to ensure they're non-discriminatory and to develop policies and practices that ensure that all people are well represented in the federal public service. And I'd like to share with you just a couple of current living examples of that. There are many we could talk about. The first one, the report, Many Voices, One Mind, was based on discussions with Indigenous peoples across the country, bargaining agents, public servants at all levels, and former public servants, and has outlined a whole-of-government strategy that seeks to reduce and remove barriers to public service employment encountered by Indigenous peoples. The report, Many Voices, One Mind, provides a wide range of actions that encourages and supports Indigenous peoples to join the public service, openly addresses bias, racism, discrimination, and improves cultural competence across the public service, and addresses various training and career development opportunities, and fundamentally to support, engage, and communicate with Indigenous employees and partners. The report has informed not just central agencies in our many HR processes, but it's truly reached out to every public servant and is making a difference, again, in what we've termed cultural competence and understanding across our organization. Another example of very active work is the LGBTQ Secretariat, which is also working across the federal public service to support the integration of LGBTQ considerations into the everyday work of government. These efforts focus on ensuring that LGBTQ issues are taken into account in the development of federal policies, programs, and laws, again pursuing inclusive innovation to ensure the best possible informed solutions and outcomes. When it comes to science-based departments, I can reflect on an event from just a couple of weeks ago, February 11th. The National Resources Council sponsored a conference in support of the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. That was February 11th. It was an excellent opportunity in and of itself to start great conversations and to engage on a wide variety of scientific studies being led by women. Over 20 departments participated. And also during that event, many science deputy ministers, the heads of the departments, stood together to sign the Dimensions Charter. Many of you may be aware of this initiative. It's a pilot program administered by the granting councils to foster increased research excellence, innovation, and creativity within the post-secondary sector through greater equity, diversity, and inclusion, recognizing that these strengthen the research community, the quality, the relevance, and the impact of the research, and ultimately the country's innovation. It's modeled after the Athena Charter from the UK, but adapted here in Canada to address broader areas of inclusion. The Dimensions Charter also recognizes that advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion is a shared responsibility that requires dedicated resources and leadership at all levels. The event demonstrated that the federal science departments, aligning with more than 100 Canadian universities and colleges who have already signed up to the Charter, acknowledged their commitment and recognizing that diversity has many facets. That diversity is one of Canada's strengths, and that leadership and intention is required to achieve change. Another recent and significant expression of the government's commitment to inclusiveness is the new Accessible Canada Act, which received royal assent last summer. That act focused on the prohibition of discrimination based on disability and aims to create a barrier-free Canada in areas under federal jurisdiction such as railways, airplanes, banks, mining companies, railways, airlines, trucking, television, and radio, anything the federal government regulates. But it's a tremendous gesture as well to ensure inclusivity for those challenged by accessibility. It also challenges the public service with a target of hiring 5,000 new employees who identify as people with disabilities and removing any barriers. And believe me, that's being paid attention to throughout the ranks. To measure all of this, it's important to measure. We also annually have a public service employee survey. So we ask all of our employees every year what they think about their workplace. And it's been going on for a number of years now, so it's building up a really good trend analysis capacity. So the 2019 Public Service Employee Survey indicates that 75% of public servants feel their organization respects individual differences, culture, work styles. 79% of public services feel their department implements activities and practices that support a diverse workplace. And 67% feel encouraged to be innovative or take initiative in their work. So that's pretty good numbers for a very large, diverse, and workforce that's spread across the country. And of course, the goal of the public service is to continue to improve those numbers. So those are a handful of examples of what the federal government is doing in the world of inclusivity and innovation. But now I'd like to offer just a few comments of personal experience in this world. From my own career as a federal science and later leading organization. It's a little bit of then and now, but I do end up somewhere. When I started my career as a federal research scientist, a field geologist, a ways back, it was a different time. At that time, I worked in truly an all-male environment. I was the first woman employed in my field, first woman researcher employed in my field, third or fourth in the organization. No onboarding, no real networks, no real peers, extremely few role models, and no real awareness of the value and importance of how diversity could enhance the work I was doing or the organization I was in. But I can tell you now that I never really felt held back or limited, although the system was probably stacked against me. But I look back to wonder why, and it was clear to me that there were leaders in the organizations I worked in who were ahead of their time in sensing, if not actually fully understanding, the value of inclusiveness in research. They were open to anyone who could contribute ideas, new approaches, new networks, work hard, and could address the challenges at hand. They were kind of special people back in the day. They chose not to be constrained or limited by the conventions of the time. They were already pushing the boundaries in their own professional lives, and they were alive to the potential of all they met. These leaders modeled and helped me see the importance of having individuals at all levels being well-informed, open-minded, and personally committed to the potential of inclusiveness to achieve excellence. More recently, leading different federal organizations, I had an opportunity to work in Canada's North and with the people of Canada's North, which of course means working with a part of Canada that's majority Indigenous. And I learned an awful lot in those roles. I had the opportunity to work with Indigenous organizations, companies, leaders, communities, and our own Indigenous employees. All of the people I worked with taught me that authentic inclusiveness stemmed from listening carefully and respecting different ways of knowing, different ways of thinking about how to approach problems, and that the paths forward needed to have many participants. When I was able to draw on that breadth of wisdom and perspective, we were able to inform innovative approaches that could provide the best solutions to the challenges at hand, whether designing programs, learning to adapt the work environment, the work culture to Northerners, rather than the other way around, which I think is our default space, or informing new policies. And they taught me how important it was to choose to lead based on that understanding. The only way things were going to change was if I and others helped to make it so. And I recalled my early champions and their willingness to energetically challenge the status quo. I recently listened to some presentations that provided some pretty challenging data on the demographics and staffing trends in the public service. Decades were mentioned. Maybe even hundreds of years were mentioned in one case, given current policies and statistics. But as I listened, I reflected, and I wanted to share with this room, it's not just the system that needs to make those changes, and the processes won't make those changes. It's the individuals, the leaders who represent the inherent value of inclusiveness and diversity and are willing to act, to make the day-to-day choices that will drive that change, the change maker role that Elder Rochelle spoke to. It's that role. It's so important, and I suspect, because you're here, that's everybody in this room. So now I'll just take a few moments to talk about what I'm working on right now. And it's focused on an innovative approach that values inclusiveness within the federal government. I'm privileged to be leading a new initiative that is intended to revitalize federal laboratories and to amplify federal science collaboration. It's a 25-year strategy that's part of the Government of Canada's plan to strengthen federal science across Canada. The initiative has a clear objective: to build world-class, innovative, accessible, and sustainable science facilities that will truly enable collaboration and support our scientific capacity. Its guiding principles necessarily include supporting scientific excellence, being agile and responsive to rapidly changing scientific context, and of course, environmental sustainability, leadership in low-carbon, resilient, and green operations. And a key one, of course, is also a diverse and inclusive talent pool, recognizing that we'll require a talented and a diverse cadre of scientists to continue to build Canada's reputation of innovation and to find solutions to the challenges facing Canadian society. As part of this principle, the initiative is, for example, planning the new labs to exceed the standards prescribed in the Accessibility Act, open to everybody. Consulting widely on inclusive design, including public-facing and community-including spaces. We want as many people as possible inside. The new labs will also be committed to community engagement and participation. One model for this partnership and the relationship is the Canadian Arctic Research Station in Cambridge Bay and its relationship with the community of Cam Bay. It was built with and by community values, and both the Inuit living in the community and scientists have made it their own, and it's now an integral part of the community, which I think is an aspiration for all of us. To amplify the collaboration objective of the initiative, departments were invited to develop infrastructure investment proposals based on shared outcomes, not their outcomes. This innovative approach departments, as you may know, have a strong tendency to work and plan with a very strong focus on their own mandates, has catalyzed scientific collaboration that had never been considered before, and I think are quite exciting to many of the scientists that are involved. But overall, I believe will significantly strengthen federal science. It's our hope that this new approach to federal labs will foster collaboration and innovation across the many organizations and jurisdictions, be able to more directly engage Canadians and the scientific ecosystem of Canada, and to provide decision makers with the best possible advice. So that's a small overview of how inclusiveness and inclusive innovation is being pursued in the public service. I wish you the very best in your discussions today. You have some really interesting speakers this morning. The vision of inclusive innovation is ambitious, but progress is being made. And key to mobilizing our society's diversity is key to the solutions we all need together moving forward. So thank you for your time. Merci, miigwech.
Thank you very much, Janet. I really appreciate your perspective, and also that you put your personal experience out front here. I really do appreciate that. And I think we all kind of noticed that some of this gets personal pretty quickly. We've kind of got to find ways to talk about that, and I really appreciate you putting that out there. I said there would be a little bit of time for questions, and we kind of went on poll everywhere to look and see if anybody here in the room had